everyone. We will meet again when we are studying present truth, and our book today is going to be the whole book of Revelation, possibly some of the books of Daniel. And then the topic is the chronological setting of the Revelation chapter by chapter. Because sometimes when we explain, we fail to understand how another chapter comes linked to the other. So that's why I chose that we should study the setup of the book of Revelation, chapter by chapter, and see how they link each other. So in chronology, so that when we explain, we understand that book. And it's also another part of summarizing the book, so we can understand this book. So we are going to start with a quote from the book which Sister Ellen White wrote, Acts of the Apostles, the book of Acts of the Apostles, page 584, second paragraph. Let's start from there.
Let none think, because they cannot explain the meaning of every symbol in the Revelation, that it is useless for them to search this book in an effort to know the meaning of the truth it contains.
We know the book is written in symbols. So Sister White says, let none think, because they cannot explain the meaning of every symbol in the book of Revelation, that it is now useless. You can't understand this mountain falling into the sea, and this came, and this. You see symbols, multiple symbols, then you don't understand what this book is all about. Let none think that it is useless for them to search this book in an effort to know the meaning of the truth it contains. It's got a lot of truth that it contains through these symbols. So what does God reckon we should do? Let's go further to the next sentence.
The one who revealed these mysteries to John will give to the diligent searcher for truth a foretaste of heavenly things.
God, who revealed these truths to John when he was writing the book of Revelation, will also give every diligent searcher of the truth the meaning of these symbols. So it's not a book left idle with symbols that you can say, oh, all these symbols I cannot know. Let me just, have nothing to do with the book of Revelation. God wants any diligent searcher to get onto it, and he will give us the meaning of these symbols. Now read on, let's hear.
The one who revealed the mysteries to John will give to the diligent searcher for truth a foretaste of heavenly things. Those whose hearts are open to the reception of truth will be enabled to understand its teachings, and will be granted the blessing promised to those who hear the words of this prophecy and keep those things which are written therein.
There are blessings in this book of Revelation. Only those who have hearts that are open to the reception of truth, God promises to open up this book to them. So let's not abandon these books, the book of Daniel, Revelation, since they have symbols. And then you say, nobody's going to explain this, let me leave this book alone. And then you concentrate in other books while ignoring this book, which is a blessing. The book of Revelation has been written with a blessing for those who hear the words, and those who read it, they have surely been promised a blessing. Now let's go to the second paragraph in Revelation.
In the Revelation, all the books of the Bible meet and end.
Where do they meet and end? Whether you go to Genesis, it meets in Revelation. Numbers, all the books, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Mark, Matthew, all these books, they all meet in Revelation. So we are being told by Acts of the Apostles here, page 584, first paragraph, is saying, in the revelation of all books of the Bible, meet and they end there. Let's hear.
The one is a prophecy and the other a revelation.
Here, there's a sentence which says, here is the complement.
Here is the complement of the book of Daniel.
Right.
One is a prophecy and to the other is a revelation.
So it's a complement. Revelation is a complement of the book of Daniel. One is a prophecy and the other is a revelation.
Yeah.
Now let's hear.
The books that was sealed is not the revelation.
Revelation is not a book which was sealed. It was never sealed. There is no way in the Bible that you get that this book was sealed.
But that portion of the prophecy of Daniel relating to the last days.
It's only the portion of the book of Daniel which relates to the last days
That was sealed.
that was sealed. But the book of Revelation itself is not a sealed book. We are all supposed to understand that book of Revelation because it's not a sealed book. The sealed book is in Daniel, where there is a portion which relates to the last days. That's where the book which was sealed is, on that portion. Now let's hear.
The book that was sealed is not the revelation, but that portion of the prophecy of Daniel relating to the last days. The angel commanded, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end."
That's the book we know was sealed until the time of the end. So the book of Daniel has sealed portions. But the book of Revelation is, the name itself says it has been revealed. It's not a book which you should be scared to read because of the symbols. But God has promised that in this book there is a blessing. And also He will aid us to read and understand that book. And all these symbols will be put clear. So I chose this topic, which is the chronology of the setup of the book of Revelation, so that we might summarize the book, making sure we put it according to chronology. And this will make us more knowledgeable as pertaining to this book. Now let's read. I chose from the book 2 TG 14, page 13, and second paragraph, and you are going to go, if possible, up to 2 TG 14, page 22 on the first paragraph. There's a lot. From 13 to 22 is a lot. Now let's go. Let's read from the first. In these studies, listen to those books.
In these studies, we have also learned that the event which caused the book with the 7 seals to be opened disclosed the revelation itself, and that strictly speaking, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him, begins with chapter 6 and ends with chapter 22.
Now, we are being told by the spirit of prophecy there that the revelation itself starts from Revelation 6 to Revelation 22. This is where we have the blessings of understanding the chronology. So we are being told from chapter 6 up to 22, that's where the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him, began. Now let's hear more.
18 chapters in all, which the breaking of the seals disclosed.
So these seals are all sealing a book. There are 7 seals. Yeah, we have 7 seals, we have 7 trumpets. All is what is being unfolded in these 18 chapters. This is what we are being told. So from Revelation chapter 6 up to Revelation chapter 22, we are unwinding the seals so that we understand all the messages within these 18 chapters. Now let's hear.
We also learned that the things that were to be hereafter from St. John's time after 96 AD were those things which the event brought forth. The great assembly itself round about the throne, having met to examine the things that were inside the book.
So that's why the judgment scene was there. After the judgment scene we saw in Revelation chapter 5, there was a book handed with 7 seals. So they were all surrounding that incident where this book was going to be opened, seal by seal. It was only to know what each seal contained from chapter 6 up to 22. Then we are going to understand the blessing and the information which is in this book. Right, let's hear.
Now I would have you note that the revelation contains several subjects, each of which is complete in itself. Although one chapter or subject may overlap or intercept the others, that is, not all the subjects and chapters are in chronological arrangement with another.
Right. For example, when you open the first seal, we saw what happened in the first seal. It was the first people who first lived on earth, and their message was multiply and replenish the earth. We saw a white horse and a man with a bow, which we said is Adam, and was given a wife who is Eve, to multiply. And imagine, we have only 2 people created on earth. What would you advise those 2 people if you want the whole earth to be filled? Multiply and replenish. But the thing is that seal, when it is opened, it does not stop at the time of the Garden of Eden only. It overlaps other seals which continue. It's still in progress right now. So it has been overlapping other events also in the book of Revelation. Now let's hear more.
These facts shall be shown as we proceed in our study.
Right.
We previously found that the judicial-like event opened with the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him, the book sealed with 7 seals.
Now we see in Revelation chapter 5, the judicial system, judgment scene, started with the book being handed to Christ, who is the Lamb, who is only worthy to open that book. So all the things that come after are the things that they're sitting on that judgment scene, examining. So that's where we have those 18 chapters coming, because they're all coming from that judgment scene. Now let's hear more.
It disclosed the revelation, and with it the heavenly assembly began its work of reviewing the past, present, and future of mankind.
So what that judicial system or the judgment scene was for? To examine
Past, present, and
past.
future.
Who lived in the past? Adam, Noah, Abraham. Those are in the past. What was their life about? What did they receive? What was their message? Did they abide by what was there? Generation by generation, all is being reviewed on that judgment scene. So we start by that when we see the Lamb being given this book with 7 seals, and all that will come from there, unwinding each seal, is the history from the beginning of the world to the end. And this is what they are examining on the judgment scene, on the planet Earth only. So that when they finish with the last generation, then we are at the end. Now let's hear more. Let's go to Revelation chapter 6, where it is the judicial system which we are supposed to see what was happening in the judgment scene, and is still continuing until today. Listen, Revelation 6, start from verse 14.
And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?
From chapter 6, you see chapter 6, where we see the seals being opened. One of them shows us right up to the end what will happen in our time when Christ shall come and the kings of the earth and all those people running away from the coming of Christ. So you see, it's all coming from Revelation chapter 6. But we see how it is overlapping other events coming to our end. Now let's hear more there. Since chapter 6
ends its story with the end of the world, it is obvious that chronological chapter 7 is sandwiched between the event which chapter 6 begins and the event which it ends.
Now, it's chapter 6 starting with the opening of the seals. But you see, starts with Adam, overlaps even all the events on Revelation 7. What is on Revelation 7? It's the sealing process. It overlaps all that and goes to the coming of Christ. That's why it says each chapter overlaps others and sandwiches. The chapter 7 is all passed by this 6th chapter going to the coming of Christ. This is exactly what Spirit of Prophet said. Each chapter overlaps other events. Now that's why we are studying the chronological, setting of this book.
The 7th chapter begins with the sealing of the 144,000.
So when we go to Revelation chapter 6, we saw it started with the opening of the seal and even ending with the coming of Christ. But let's go to the 7th chapter. The 7th chapter starts with the sealing process. You see, that Revelation chapter 6 was overlapping also Revelation 7, going past to the time Christ comes. So the 7th chapter, what was it? The sealing of the 144,000.
Yeah.
Which comes after the seal is starting to open. And also comes in the middle of that chapter 6, overlapping the events on Revelation chapter 7. But let's hear what the writer wants.
The 7th chapter begins with the sealing of the 144,000.
Right.
And ends with the gathering of the great multitude.
Did you see? Revelation chapter 7. If you start with verse 1, you find that it's the 4 winds held. That no one should, let loose those winds so that they will cause destruction before the 144,000 are sealed. And John says in verse 4 of Revelation chapter 7, I saw those who were sealed 144,000 in number. But we see even in verse 9, where John sees now another group which is not 144,000, which is the greater multitude, which no man can number, which comes in the judgment of the Gentiles now. Because first was the judgment occurring as the sealing process was occurring in the church, which is the 144,000 being produced. And then after that, we see another group of people in verse 9, a greater multitude which no man can number, coming still on the same chapter of chapter 7. So now that's why it says it starts with the sealing of the 144,000, ends with also the greater multitude. On verse 9, we see all the Gentiles now are sealed, which a numberless crowd. And yet from the church, there was a numbered crowd, 144,000. But from the greater multitude, we see a great multitude which no man can number. So the reception of Christ in that chapter, in the section of the Gentiles, was much more than the reception of Christ in the house of God. So now we see that the 7th chapter begins with the sealing of the 144,000 and ends with the gathering of the greater multitude touching eternity. Already they are talking of events in eternity in chapter 7. Do you see? Even if it comes in the middle of chapter 6 of the opening of the seals, chapter 6 bypasses Revelation 7, where there is sealing of these two groups, the house of God and the Gentiles. And also, Revelation chapter 7 proceeds into eternity. That we see what is happening in the throne of God as well. Now, let's hear in chapter 8 there.
Chapter 8, the opening of the 7th seal, begins by introducing another subject, the subject of the 7 trumpets.
Do you see? When we go to chapter 8, If you take that chapter 7 is mentioned even going into eternity, and then you expect that chapter 8 will proceed from eternity, that's not what happens. Because chapter 8 comes also in the middle, where it is also overlapped by chapter 6 as well. What do we see in chapter 8? Let's hear.
Chapter 8, the opening of the seventh seal,
Right.
begins by introducing another subject, the subject of the seven trumpets.
You see, when we see now after chapter 7, we see chapter 8 introducing the trumpets. So to those who are not wise in reading, they will take it that this is an event following chapter 7. Yet it's an event also starting at the background, overlapping also chapter 7. But let's hear more what the Spirit of Prophet says.
The trumpets, as we learned in our previous studies, spread through chapters 9 to 11.
Do you see where the trumpets led us to? Spread to chapter 9, chapter 11. We saw what happened from chapter 9 up to chapter 11. What are the events in chapter 9 and 11? We are going to study them. So, but the trumpets also spread through. But where did they start from? Listen to that.
He also caused the little book to be eaten, taken to heart, which later became bitter inside
You
the
see,
eater.
the trumpets went through. He also caused the little book to be eaten. So passes through. If it passes through chapter 9 up to 11, it also passes through Revelation chapter 10, where there was a little book which is open. So it means the chapter 8, starting with the trumpets, they go through and pass the period where William Miller was opening the book in chapter 10, and passes through that event of 1844, of 1831, where the book was eaten by William Miller, and it was sour in the belly, but sweet in the mouth. So it went through chapter 10 as well. That's where there is a little book. Now let's hear more.
We further learned that the trumpets disclose the messages of God and the consequences of the unrepentant sinners, that the trumpets begin with the first such message, the message of Noah, and it ends with the last message in probationary time.
See how the trumpets start. They don't just start after Revelation 7, because Revelation 7 starts with the sealing of the 144,000, but they start well beyond, in the time of Adam as well. Come through, overlaps chapter 7, and goes to chapter 8, goes to chapter 9, up to chapter 11, goes through probationary time. That's the trumpet. Because the last trumpet we see is the one which is already in leading us into the kingdom. In chapter 12, verse 11, or chapter 11. Right, so you find that this Revelation chapter 8 don't just come in and follow Revelation 7. It starts also with Adam. Those are the trumpets. Go pass through Revelation 7 or Revelation 6. Goes through 9 up to 11, and then also to eternity. So it's spreading through the whole entire history of the period. Let's hear more.
We further learned that the trumpets disclose the messages of God and the consequences of the unrepentant sinners, that the trumpets begin with the first such message, the message of Noah, and they end with the last message in probationary time, the message which announces that the mystery of God, the gospel work, is finished and that the probationary time is at an end.
You see, when in chapter 10, when it says in verse 7, in those before the seventh trumpet shall sound, the mystery of God will be all finished, which is the mystery of preaching the gospel producing somebody who will look like Christ. Finishes well before the beginning of the seventh trumpet, as it is in chapter 10, verse 7. So you find that it goes past until we are in the mystery where everybody who is supposed to be saved has been saved, has received the seal. So that's where the trumpets go as far. But let's hear more.
This is further seen from the fact that the rest of the men who were not killed by the fire, smoke, and brimstone, which came out of the horse's mouth, repented not. Indeed, it could not be saved.
In Revelation chapter 9, verse 18, it says, those who did not repent, the men who were not killed by fire, smoke, and brimstone, which came out of the horse's mouth, it's further seen from the fact that the rest of the men who were not killed by fire, smoke, and brimstone, which came out of the horse's mouth, repented not. Indeed, it could not be saved. So you see, it goes right to the end where we have those who are left without repenting. Who God, Christ says, let them stay unrepented. Now, let's go to, they repented not.
They repented not. If their time of repentance had not passed, thus it is that chapters 8 and 9 bring us to the close of probation.
So you see, each chapter starts from Adam and tells us in our time what is happening, passes through our time, and until we are at the probation of everyone who is supposed to be saved. Now let's hear.
Chapters 10 and 11
Right?
consequently sandwich in chapters 8 and 9.
Now, I think for a brief understanding, let's go to those chapters so that we don't just theorize them without reading them. Chapter 10 and 11 consequently sandwich in chapter 8 and 9. What is happening on chapter 10? Read chapter 10.
And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire.
We saw on our previous videos, if you don't, just go scroll through all the videos in BSM TV, you find Revelation 10. That was the introduction of the first angel's message with William Miller, where this book, which was open, signified that it was the book of Daniel, which was promised to be opened in the time of the end. That's what is on chapter 10. So we see this book being opened, and when it is opened, William Miller was told to eat the book, which was citizen in the mouth, and also bitter in the belly. That is on chapter 10. That was in Revelation chapter, in the year 1831, when he was raised to preach the first angel's message. And we saw up to 1844. So you see that Revelation chapter 10 is 1844. That's where we are. But it goes further to Revelation chapter 10, verse 7. Let's hear verse 7.
But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound,
Right.
the mystery of God should be finished.
Right. So you see in chapter 10, verse 7, it goes up to when the mystery of God is now complete, before the sounding of the seventh trumpet. So it means before the ushering in of the kingdom, the seventh trumpet is only serving to usher in the kingdom. That is it. So when he says, thus it is that chapters 8 and 9 bring us to the close of probation, we understand what it means. Because it goes where in the voice of the sixth trumpet, before the seventh is opened, the mystery of God is closed. It's closed. No more preaching after that. So you can see that trumpet, that Revelation chapter 8 and 9 has brought us to the end of probation. So chapters 10 and 11 consequently sandwich in chapters 8 and 9. So you could think that chapter 10 now and 11 is explaining about the end of probationary time. But when you go also to chapter, these two chapters, 10 and 11, they also bypass the event on chapter 8 and the event on chapter 9, which are the events of the trumpets.
Yeah.
They also envelop them. Now let's hear more. The trumpets themselves.
The trumpets themselves are shown to be in two divisions.
Right.
4 in the Old Testament time,
Right.
and 3 in the New.
Right, which is true. The first 4 trumpets are in Old Testament time. And then the last 3 are in the New Testament time, right? Which is true. The three wars are in the New Testament time. All that is done on the fifth trumpet, sixth, and seventh is all events happening in the New Testament time, right? And let's hear.
The trumpets themselves are shown to be in two divisions, 4 in the Old Testament time and 3 in the New. That is, the last 3 are woe trumpets. The first of the woe trumpets introduces the descending of the heavenly star, to whom the key of the bottomless pit was given.
Right. So you see, when we go to that trumpet, the fifth trumpet, we see an angel which comes already with a key to the bottomless pit. And we know this angel, who it is. It's Christ himself. There's no one who has the key to the bottomless pit except Christ himself. Because we see in Revelation chapter 20, him locking the devil in the bottomless pit. Nobody can do that to the devil except Christ himself. Now let's hear the verse woe.
Obviously, the star is symbolical of the angel who at the commencement of the millennial shuts Satan into the bottomless pit.
Right.
For he, the angel of Revelation 20 verse 1, is the angel who has the key to the bottomless pit.
Right.
He could not possibly have the key if it had been given to some other.
So we know on Revelation, on the fifth trumpet, the one who came with the key to the bottomless pit is Christ. Why? Because we see him locking the devil in Revelation chapter 20 verse 1, locking the devil before millennium. So he couldn't have taken the key elsewhere again and used it. It was him who is the star coming with this key to the bottomless pit. So chapter 10, let's hear.
Chapter 10 discloses that the angel who opened the little book is the angel who brings the spiritual rain for the developing and ripening of the spiritual grain.
Now we saw on chapter 10, when we just read it, that it's an angel coming with an open book. Let's see the properties on chapter 10, which shows that it is the coming of the rain, spiritual rain. Verse 1.
And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head.
Right.
And his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire.
Right.
And he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot upon the earth.
Why do we say it's got rain? All the properties, a rainbow, a sun, all that indicates there is rain.
Yeah.
Now, this is the spiritual rain which came with William Miller preaching the first angel's message. That's why that message, when he read Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, was sweet as honey. And in the belly it was bitter, because he got the disappointment when Christ never came. But instead, Christ was going into the Holy of Holies. His timing was good. 2,300 days, went up to 1844. But the event was not the coming on earth, but it was coming from the third heavens to the first heavens, going into the Holy of Holies, what Christ did in the time of the judgment scene. Now, let's hear.
Verse 10 more.
Right, where you...
In chapter 10.
Yeah, where you are reading, in the chapter. In 2 TG.
Chapter 10 discloses that the angel who opened the little book is the angel who brings the spiritual rain for the development and ripening of the spiritual grain.
Right.
For that is the end of the world, the time the kingdoms of the world become the kingdoms of our Lord and his Christ.
We saw that in verse 15. Yeah.
The honey sweetness, while the book was being eaten, obviously denotes that the things written therein were joyously received. But to the eater of the book, it later caused indigestion, so to speak, and thus a disappointment, that is, the things in the book were not fully comprehended, and thus in the end the joy vanished away and disappointment crept in. After this, the book eaters were commissioned to prophesy again, to preach again.
Right. That's the disappointment which happened in 1844. When Christ never came, that was chapter 10. He enjoyed the book, but there was a miscalculation. He thought Christ was coming on earth, but Christ was going into the Hall of Holies after the 2,300 days. But then that's why at the end of that chapter, in chapter 10, he was urged to prophesy again. That was the starting of the third angel's message with Sister White. Prophesy again. That's why it started with the imaging of the third angel's message to start taking more people into Sabbath, believing the Sabbath, changing the Sabbath from Sunday to Sabbath, and then starting to prophesy again. This was chapter 10, right? This angel.
This angel in the stream of time therefore appears at the unsealing of the book of Daniel, for it is the only book in the Bible that was ever sealed, and never to be opened from the time it was written to the time of the end.
So there we are correct to say this book which William Miller was reading in Revelation chapter 10 was the book which was sealed in Daniel chapter, the last chapter, chapter 12. Seal up this book until the time of the end. And it was promised that in the time of the end there will be people running to and fro, and the knowledge of this book will be increased. That's the time we are in. We should be now increasing in knowledge. Since William Miller started from 1844, that book was opened, and we should be enjoying it. Nobody should be talking of the Revelation being sealed now. It is never sealed. That book which was sealed was Daniel, on that portion pertaining to the last events. So here, the subject of chapter 10.
The subject of chapter 10 ends with the second verse of chapter 11.
So let's go to the second verse of chapter 11. The subject of chapter 10 ends with the second verse of chapter 11. We want to understand that chronology.
11 verse 2. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles.
What is happening now on the second verse is where John is being instructed to seal the temple. And what is it in verse 1?
And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein.
Right? So what three things he was measuring?
Altar,
the altar,
temple, worshippers.
And worshippers. So those are the three categories of the people that are supposed to be sealed. Where are the altars? The altars are those who started. Judgment for the dead is the one that started. And from the first death, which is the death of Abel, is the first death on earth that has been recorded in the Bible. And that all those who died up to 1844 were the altar. And then from 1844 till this time started judgment for the living, they are the temple. And then from judgment of the living until now, we are in the time of the judgment of the living. So you see how the chronology, it was one, the altar, the temple, and worshippers. So we are in the category of worshippers. Now verse 2, let's see. So now when it says, Revelation chapter 10 starts with William Miller coming with a book which is open, and also ends with those who are being sealed, the worshippers, in the judgment of the living. You understand the chronology of 10 and 11. In verse 2 of 11, it's talking about those who are in the judgment of the living, first being told to measure the worshippers, but leave those in the outer court. Definitely, he was being told to measure those. Judgment begins in the house of God first, but not together with the Gentiles. The Gentiles, okay, that's the outer court, which is being said, leave the outer court. Now let's hear the subject. So we now know when it says the subject of chapter 10 ends with the second verse of chapter 11. we understand that's the chronology. It starts with chapter 10, an open book, which is 1844, William Miller getting the disappointment when the belly was bitter. Goes to chapter 11, verse 2, where we see the measuring of the altar, the temple, and the worshippers. Don't measure those in the outer court yet. It has been apportioned to the Gentiles. It's clear on Revelation chapter 11. Now let's hear more.
The subject of chapter 10 ends with the second verse of chapter 11.
Right.
The verse which brings us to the time of the measuring of the people,
Right.
which obviously is the numbering of the 144,000.
So the measuring is the numbering of the 144,000. Leave the outer court, leave the Gentile. Judgment begins in the house of God first. Now let's hear.
For they are the only numbered company of the people in the thread of prophecy. Thus it is that chapter 10, including verses 1 and 2 from chapter 11, begins at the time of the end and ends with the numbering of the 144,000.
So chapter 10 begins at the time of the end, or at the time when William Miller preaches the first angel's message, and ends with Revelation chapter 11 at the time of the numbering of the 144,000. You see, William Miller, Sister White, all are working for Sabbath keepers. They started with William Miller, the first day Adventist, and finishing with the Sabbath keepers, where they are now receiving the seal. So that's the chronology there. Now let's hear more. In 11th chapter.
The 11th chapter, save for the first two verses, which chronologically belong to the 10th chapter, goes still further back in time than does the 10th chapter. It contains the subject of the two witnesses who prophesied during the 1260 prophetic days.
Let's go to the 11th chapter. Except the verse 1 and 2. We have seen verse 1 and 2 belongs to the Sabbath keepers who are being measured. But verse 3 upwards has gone now further back to the dark ages. Listen to that.
Verse 3. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth.
Is it proof enough now that on Revelation 11, verse 3 now, goes further before the Sabbath keepers are sealed? Further to the time of the Dark Ages, where there is 1,260 days, which is the time of the Dark Ages. So in chapter 11, it's got both what is happening in the sealing process, starting from William Miller, and also verse 3 takes us back to the Dark Ages. So you see, they overlap each other, coming from the backwards and front. But we have to understand the chronology which Revelation has. Now let's hear end.
It too brings us forward to the end of the world, the time the kingdoms of the world become the kingdoms of our Lord and his Christ.
Where does chapter 11 bring us to? In verse 15, let's see. Let's go to chapter 11, verse 15.
And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven, saying, The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever.
So you see, chapter 11 contains the sealing on verse 1 and 2. And also verse 3 takes us back to the Dark Ages, goes past until we reach where the kingdom is being established. The kingdom of this world become subject to the kingdom of heaven. So you can see that chronology on chapter 10 and 11. I hope you understand that one. Now let's hear in chapter 12.
Chapter 12 takes us even further back in time than chapter 11.
Now let's go to chapter 11, chapter 12. Go to chapter 12, this.
Verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed in the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars.
Right?
And she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pained to be delivered.
Right?
And there appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born.
So you see what is happening on chapter 12? It has taken us further back, chapter 12, to seeing a woman who is pregnant, but at the time of delivering the child. But it also has a dragon in front of the woman, whose tail drew a third part of the angels in heaven. Then the dragon, we know in verse 12 of that, or verse 9 of the chapter 12, is the devil. So it is taking us back to the events that happened even in heaven. But let's hear what Spirit of Prophet says. Chapter 12 takes us even further.
Chapter 12 takes us even further back in time than chapter 11, way beyond the birth of Christ, and forward to the time the earth opens her mouth and swallows up the flood, and to the time of the remnant.
Now, where does this chapter 12 go? It comes further from the time Christ appeared for the first time. When he came, he was born, and the child who was born in verse 6, chapter 12, verse 6, the child who was born was caught up to heaven. We saw what happened. It took us all those events. That's chapter 12. But it goes further to the time when the remnant has remained after the slaughter of Ezekiel 9. Why do I say the slaughter of Ezekiel 9? It's there on chapter 12. Let's go to slaughter of Ezekiel 9, chapter 12. Start from verse 15 there. So we saw when this woman was traveling in birth, in verse 6, about to deliver the son, which is Christ. Now this son was delivered, which was Christ, who gave rise to Christians, who started in Jerusalem. And when times were changed and festivals changed, this woman was given eagle's wings to fly to the wilderness. Now, when the woman now is in the wilderness, what followed her? Let's hear from verse 15.
And the serpent cast out his mouth, water as a flood,
Right.
after the woman, and that he might cause her to be carried away the flood.
Right.
And
so, what is this water? And obviously, in Revelation 17, verse 15, there are people, tongues, multitude. If it says tongues, multitudes, nations, it's not Israel. It's not people who are keeping Sabbath. It's not people who are Sabbath keepers. When it is Sabbath keeping people, it says Israel. Let's get used to those terminologies. So people's nations' tongues were all flooded by the devil in the mouth, flooding the woman. So what are we seeing in the woman who fled to the wilderness now? Invaded by those people who are not belonging to that church. But we don't know them. It's the prophets who knows them. It says they came from the flood which came from the dragon's mouth. They are there. When you say feast should be kept, they say no, they shouldn't. When you say let's kneel for prayer, they say no, even standing is fine. Let's keep the statutes, the feasts in their proper time. They say no, anytime. When you say let's have the Lord's Supper on the proper date, which is the 14th day of the first Jewish month, they say anytime, 13th Sabbath, whatever. So the flood, which came from the devil's mouth, went straight to the woman to cause the woman to be taken away. But thank God, the people of God are still there, will uphold his law, will uphold all these appointed times according to the design which is in the Bible. So the woman who had been flooded by the devil, the people who have been trained by the devil to flood it, to take all these times away. But what happened next? We see on verse 15. We'll start on verse 15. Let's continue.
Revelation 12. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman,
Right.
that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood.
But unfortunately, she can't be carried away.
And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth. And
There,
swallowed
Ezekiel
up the
chapter
flood.
9, the earth helped the woman, opened up like it did in the time of Moses. Opened up Korah and Dathan, and everyone who were fighting Moses went down. So this is the slaughter of Ezekiel 9, which we see chapter 12 going past the time of the slaughter. And we are also continuously telling people that you have to get the 3 seals now. Otherwise, you go into this general slaughter from the angels when Christ appears. So this slaughter comes before the gospel extends to the Gentiles. It is done to wipe all those who don't have the seal in Ezekiel 9. So the 8th now, Revelation chapter 12, that's why we said in the beginning, all books are interlocked in the book of Revelation. Now you see Ezekiel 9 is there on verse 15 and 16. The 8th now opened the mouth for the slaughter. And what happened then? When those who had no seal were removed by the earth, what happened on the next verse? What happened?
And the dragon was wroth with the woman.
Now the dragon remained, seeing all his people now have been wiped by Ezekiel 9. The dragon was wroth with the woman. Listen to that.
And went to make war with the remnant of her seed.
Right?
With which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ.
They have a testimony of Jesus. They keep the commandments. And at the same time, they have a prophet. The testimony of Jesus is a prophet amongst them. This is what enraged the devil. That's why you hear people pompously telling you that there's no prophet. Well, it's because the devil doesn't want to hear the testimony of Jesus. These are the people who were keeping the festivals. You can't keep without the prophet. When Moses was summoned to Mount Sinai to be given all these festivals, all the 10 commandments, he was a prophet to conduct those festivals. You can't keep them without festivals. It's true when they say there's no prophet. Of course, they can't keep the festivals without a prophet. The devil was wroth with the woman because that woman now remained with what is called the remnant. After Ezekiel 9, he has removed all who refused the seal of God. Now we are seeing this is chapter 12. Now let's hear the commentary there. Where you are reading. Chapter 12 takes
Chapter
us.
12 takes us even further back in the time
of the birth of Christ.
Way beyond the birth of Christ. Then forward to the time the earth opens her mouth and swallows up the flood. And the time of the remnant are those who are left after the others have been swallowed up by the earth. They as a people keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. They are persecuted by the dragon immediately after the earth swallows up the flood. After
the earth swallows the flood. You remember what happened in the time of Moses? The Korahs and Datan, when they were swallowed, 250 princesses were swallowed by the earth. But the next day, what happened? 3,000 were up in arms to say, Moses, you caused these people to die. So that will happen when the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 is finished, when he says, start with those who in front. Why? Because they were supposed to teach these people and warn them about this impending judgment. But now they didn't. So God says, start with them to the angels, summons the angels to start with them. And then when they are all slaughtered, the next day the dragon was wroth with the woman, went to fight the woman and the seed, which keeps the commandments and have the testimony of Jesus. That's why the testimony of Jesus, if you want, you can read even in the book CET by Sister White. On page 242, you find the testimony of Jesus is the prophet. So the devil find that it was the prophet who made sure the festivals were kept. This is what happened. We wanted the whole house of God to be wiped. But fortunate God made sure there are some who have the testimony of Jesus, keeping the commandments and all the laws of God, the festivals, the moral law. And this is what enrages the dragon. Already we can see the dragon is enraged right now, fighting those who are keeping festivals. The way they are hated, the way they don't even want to hear the gospel, is the devil inspiring people to target the festivals of God. That the devil hates the festivals. That anyone who advocates them is after them, is after those people. So the next day after the slaughter, the dragon will be wroth with the woman. That's what we are studying from the spirit of prophecy. They as a people, listen to that.
They as a people keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. They are persecuted by the dragon immediately after the earth swallows up the flood. And as yet we know not a people in the world of whom inspiration can say that they as a people, all of them, actually keep the commandments of God. The only such group of people that could possibly be found in time are the 144,000.
So the 144,000 will be purely feast keepers, coming under the leadership of a prophet. Those are called the remnant. Never ever see people using this terminology as people who are still commingled the wheat and tares and calling them a remnant. Don't listen. The remnant only comes after the slaughter of Ezekiel 9, after Revelation chapter 12, verse 15 to 16. Then we see the remnant in verse 17. Now listen, we have gone to chapter 12, starts with the birth of Christ, and well before the dragon drew a third of the angels from heaven. So it covers that period and goes until the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 and the remnant being with a prophet. Now, let's hear. The testimony of Jesus Christ, inspiration explained, is the spirit of prophecy. Right. To have the spirit of prophecy, listen to that.
To have the spirit of prophecy is to have the spirit who uttered the prophecies and who only can interpret them. For no prophecy of the scripture is of any private interpretation.
That's why you don't hear much about this book of Revelation or book of Daniel. You hear all sorts of topics that have nothing to do with prophecy. They are only interpreted by the spirit that wrote Revelation. If you don't have that spirit that wrote Revelation, if you are not the prophet of the hour to explain that all, that will be Greek to you. That's why you see most people overlooking this book of Revelation. They come up with funny topics that have nothing to do with what is designed for this time. This time is designed for this book, is opened, and knowledge for this book will be known all over. And then?
No, without the inspiration of the same Spirit. For the prophecy came not in old time by the will of man, but holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Ghost.
Right.
And consequently, only holy men of God in the Spirit can interpret the scriptures.
Only holy men of God in the Spirit will be able to understand Revelation and interpret it to the people. Without the Spirit that prescribed those symbols, that will be Greek. Now let's hear more. Thus
it is that chapter 12 ends its story with the remnant and the servants of God, the first fruits, the 144,000. They become the remnant after the hypocrites among them are swallowed by the earth, so to speak. This remnant will, as a people, be keeping the commandments of God and be without guile in their mouths.
Right. So we have seen so far Revelation chapter 12. And then we are going to Revelation chapter 13. Let's hear. They being the first fruits, inspiration thus points out that there is to be a second fruit. So when we see the 144,000 are termed first fruits, which is a language which is in Leviticus chapter 23. Those who read the symbolic service, they are understanding what is being said in Revelation. That's why it is in conjunction with the keeping of the festivals, because the language which is being used there is coming from the symbolic service. Now, the first fruits are 144,000. Therefore, on Revelation chapter 7, the very same chapter, we see the second fruits on verse 9. The greater multitude which no man can number. These are second fruits. Now, let's proceed on that one.
And so we see that chapter 12 brings us to the time of the church is purified.
So that time when there is Ezekiel chapter 9, taking off those without the seal of God. That's what the term says, the time of purification for the church. It doesn't matter whether you are in the house of God, in the church, or we are outside. If you are still a Sabbath keeper, the seal is passing through you. And God will have a people in the heart. We have taken all his laws, including the festivals, and that's all. No churches will go to heaven. It will be people, individuals, going to heaven. Now let's hear more.
And so we see that chapter 12 brings us to the time the church is purified. The time she as a church truly keeps the commandments of God. When in time does chapter 12 begin? Well, it begins with the day of the woman mentioned therein conceived the man-child. Specifically speaking, her conception of the child points back to the time inspiration promised to send the Redeemer to the church.
Right. Now let's go to chapter 13. Yeah, 13.
Chapter 13.
It begins when the Dark Ages church now.
Chapter 13 begins with the dissolution of the Dark Ages church and with the kings who arose from it, who then took their crowns as symbolized by the crowned horns of the leopard-like beast.
Right. So we see the leopard-like beast started with all those kings, 10 of them, 10 horns. The horns symbolize kingdoms. And also there was one which came, it took off 3 and remained with 8. We know what happened. First it was the ecclesiastical Rome, and then next is Papa Rome. We know what that happened in history. Now let's hear. That's where we are with chapter 13.
Thus the chapter closes with the harvest of the earth.
Right.
The chapter itself shows that the harvest is in 2 sections. The first of which is reaped by the Son of Man, and the second by an angel. Evidently, these 2 harvests yield the first and the second fruits.
Right. So here it says, the chapter ends with the 2 horned beasts decree. The decree to kill all who dare not receive the mark of the beast. Thus will the dragon be wroth with the woman, and thus will he persecute the remnant. Now, chapter 13 starts with all the coming in of the 10 horns, 7 heads, all those a continuation from the time the Roman Empire came until the time which is future to us, which is the time of the 2 horned beast, when it's going to be instilling the number 666 to the Gentiles. Because the first number 666 starts in the house of God. So there is a man putting that number. Because we have been warned. How can the church have the third angel's message warning us when there's nothing happening in the church? God warned, because people will be not allowed to keep God's times, that is the festivals, in the church. That's why he made the warning. And he says, you are worshipping the beast if you are not keeping God's times in the proper place. So that was the warning to us. The third angel's message went to us, not outside. The warning is the times of God, not only the Sabbath only. The festivals, because in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, is both the festivals and the 10 Commandments, which were tampered with. So the warning starts with us. But with us, already we have accepted the Sabbath. But there's one thing we are debating, the festivals. That's where most people will be overcome by the beast. And then when he finishes with us, the slaughter goes to those who don't have the seal. And then the judgment also, the message extends to the Gentile world. That's where we are on Revelation 13, where we will have people who cannot buy or sell unless those inscribed 666. That's when the 4 winds will have been let loose. There will be great persecution, a time of trouble such as never was, which Daniel chapter 12 mentions. That's where we in chapter 13, right? So thus will the dragon be wroth in the time of trouble such as never was. The 14th chapter, let's hear.
The 14th chapter starts with the 144,000 standing with the Lamb on Mount Zion.
What time is that? It's after the sealing of the church. Then the church produced the 144,000, which are servants, standing on Mount Zion with the Lamb, Christ is still the Lamb because he's still doing priestly duties to the Gentiles, summoning the 144,000 to go to the Gentiles to preach the same message which most people in the church failed and went through the general slaughter. Now let's hear.
Thus the chapter then followed the three angels' messages in their direct and final application for the gathering of the second fruit.
So we have first what is called the three angels' messages directed to the church. And then when the 144,000 stand on Mount Zion, we have another three angels' messages directed to the Gentile world. So what is it? We saw it on chapter 8 and chapter 4 that there was lightning, thunder, and earthquake. That is the one now going to the Gentile world. And when the seal was opened in the time of the church, it started with lightning, thunderings, and voices. So what do they start with? The Gentile, when they are now being measured, in Revelation 11 says, leave this portion of the outer court. It's for the Gentiles. They start also with the Sabbath, the 10 Commandments, and also the festivals, and also the new name of Christ. Also, they have the same test that the church had. That's where we will now be seeing the national Sunday laws. We can't be tested by Sunday. We already know in our syllabus that it is wrong day. But then they will be tested by the Sunday laws. And that will bring a time of trouble such as never was. Sunday laws and also the festivals, because they are also used to the pagan feast, like we were. And also the new name of Christ, the branch. That will also go the three angels' messages, starting with Sister White one, which is the Sabbath, festivals, and also the new name. Also goes to the Gentile world. But God says there will be a greater multitude, which no man can number. There is no, their prejudice and bias is much less than what was with us. That's why God had no pity, sent straight away Ezekiel 9 to us. Why? Because we have all the Spirit of Prophecy books. We have the Bible. They don't have the Spirit of Prophecy book. And it causes them to have less bias and less prejudice. That's why God says when their time comes, he will simply hiss to them in Zechariah. He will hiss to them and they come. That's why he says when he's talking about the Gentiles, he has many sheep which are not in the 144,000 crowd. And when their time comes, he will just hiss and they will come. Yeah. They are not so hard as in Ezekiel chapter 3 where it says, I'm sending you to the house of God, which is so hard-hearted, adamant, like flinch. Stiff-necked. This is what is in Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, of saying how much hard we are. But them don't have that condemnation. Ezekiel was told, when I send you to them, they are not hard. I'm just simple. I'm not sending you to them, but to the house of God, because them will understand straight away. Now, listen to that. It says, the 14th chapter now starts with the 144,000 standing on Mount Zion, ready now to go to preach to the Gentiles. And what? Then
follow the three angels' messages, right? And their direct and final application for the gathering of the second.
So it's a repetition of the three angels' messages to them, which starts with Sister White's message, next the festivals, next also the branch name. Like it was with us, God, New Jerusalem, and the glorious star. It was those three, still with them, the same. Now let's hear. Thus
the chapter closes with the harvest of the earth.
The chapter of Revelation, chapter 14, closes now with the general harvest of the earth.
The chapter itself shows that the harvest is in two sections. The first of which is reaped by the Son of Man, and the second by an angel.
Right.
Evidently, these two harvests yield the first and the second fruits.
Right. So when you go to Revelation chapter 14, it's got 5 angels' messages. And these 5 angels' messages are the ones testing first the church and also test the Gentiles. And it's got 2 harvests. the harvest for the church and the harvest for the Gentiles. Now, chapter 15 of Revelation 14, let's hear.
Chapter 15 describes the events that bring probationary time to an end.
Now, when we are going on chapter 15, let's go to chapter 15. Revelation chapter 15.
Verse 1.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous.
Right.
7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God.
So when they have 7 last plagues, it means the probationary time has been closed, generally closed for both the church and the Gentiles. Now the time of the last. We saw when the church closed, it's Ezekiel 9 which came to wipe up those who refused, who rejected the message. Now with the Gentiles also, when the probationary time closes, it's the 7 last plagues. That's Revelation chapter 15. Now the angel is seen with the 7 last plagues. So now go back to the paragraph in the Spirit of Prophecy. Chapter 15 describes the events that bring probationary time to the end. And chapter 16 now, what does chapter 16 do?
And chapter 16 tells of the 7 last plagues.
So these very 7 last plagues go into the Gentile world. They have nothing now to the Church of God, because the Church of God had Ezekiel 9 and it's finished. It doesn't have those who rejected. It's got the servants who are now harvesting the second fruits from the Gentile world. So these 7 last plagues, now we see them in Revelation chapter 16. All of them, 7 of them, going to the Gentile world, who have rejected the seal of God and accepted 666. This is their punishment of Revelation chapter 16. Now let's hear. Chapter 17.
Chapter 17 begins with the rise of Babylon,
right,
the Great,
right,
her dominion and her dominion. Figuratively speaking, the scarlet-colored beast, the beast she drives, rules, is her dominion. This ecclesiastical world government develops after the leopard-like beast symbolization ends its career. For
now, the leopard-like beast is where we are in Revelation 13. It's with 10 horns and 7 heads. And one of the heads had a wound. And this is our time where we are getting the seal in the church. As that time ends, we are approached by the 2-horned beast. That's the beginning of Revelation 17. It begins with the 2-horned beast. When the world governments have united and the world churches have united. That's Revelation chapter 17. Now let's hear. This ecclesiastical world government develops.
This ecclesiastical world government develops after the leopard-like beast symbolization ends its career. For the horns of the scarlet-colored beast are crownless.
So you saw the crowns which were on the leopard-like beast, which is in our time. They were crowns on the horns. But if you go to the scarlet-colored beast in Revelation 17, it has no horns. So that's significant. There is no more, involvement of the government in the time of the leopard leg or of the scarlet-colored beast, because the color also is now scarlet. So what is it? It denotes that time when all the saints have been taken from the Gentile world. They are all gathered in the kingdom in Jerusalem. And what is in the world is it's full of people who have accepted 666, which is sin. 666, it is the breaking of God's laws, and that's why the color now is scarlet. But there is no crown in the horns anymore. Now let's hear more.
For the horns of the scarlet-colored beast are crownless,
right,
whereas the horns of the leopard-like are crowned.
Right.
Its crowned horns show the world ruled by crowned kings, which already are about to pass away. And the scarlet-colored beast's crownless horns show a crownless world ruled by Babylon, who rides the beast, rules it.
The church-state solution, where the church will combine with the civil governments, one world government and one world council of churches. That's what will be called Babylon. That's the one now ruling the whole people who have received 666. And at that time, the governments now have not been crowned. Who is ruling is that image of the beast, or the church-state combination. That's what is called Babylon at that time. You get that point? And so this beast says inspiration.
This beast says inspiration was and is not, and yet is. That is, he lived before the 1,000 years, and therefore was. Does not live during the 1,000 years.
In Revelation 17, we hear that expression that the beast was,
and
is not, and shall ascend, and is going to perdition.
And
so it means it was there before we went for 1,000 years for millennium.
And is no longer
it's there. No longer there in the time of millennium. And then after millennium will be, when we come from heaven, after millennium, that beast, all the people who had not gone to heaven will be resurrected only for perdition. Now let's hear more. He is the eighth.
He is the eighth.
So when that beast arises, is resurrected after millennium, becomes the eighth. He is the eighth.
He is the eighth and is of the seven. That is Daniel's 4 beasts of chapter 7.
We have Daniel's 4 beasts of chapter 7.
And John's...
We have in Daniel chapter 7, one, the beast which looked like a lion, a bear, which is Medo-Persia, looked like a leopard, which is Greece, and we have a nondescript beast, which are the thigh, which is Rome. These are the 4 beasts of Daniel. These are the 4. We have been told that is of the 7. So we have 4 in the time of the Old Testament. And then what?
He is of...
He is the 8th.
He is the 8th and is of the 7. That is Daniel's 4 beasts of chapter 7. And John's 2 of chapter 13.
So chapter 13 has 2 beasts, the leopard-like and the 2 horned. They join those 4 in Daniel. They become 6. And then what?
And John's 2 of chapter 13, total 6. The scarlet colored of chapter 17 is therefore the 7th and the commencement of the millennium.
So the scarlet colored, when there is no more saints in the Gentile world, is now scarlet color, is the 7th. So you see the counting? 4 from Daniel chapter 7, which are lion, bear, leopard-like, and the nondescript, become 4. And then there are 2 in Revelation 13, which is the leopard-like beast and the 2-horned beast on Revelation 13, verse 11. And then the 7th one is the scarlet, when all the saints have been taken from the Gentile world. Those that remain with 666 are the 7th. But that 7th one was and was not and will come back. After millennium, when the saints are back from heaven, that scarlet colored will be resurrected and becomes the 8th. You understand the terminology now? It's a simple thing. Yeah. Right? Is therefore the 7th at the commencement of the millennium, and is the 8th after the millennium, and is of the 7 because, as I said before, he is to die his first death. So that beast now is waiting for perdition. Is the one that has those who are going now to be consumed by fire. That's the 8th one.
Is of the 7 because, as I said before, he is to die his first death at the commencement of the millennium, and in the resurrection after the millennium, he lives again for a short period before he meets his second death. And that makes him the 8th in his second phase and 7th in his first phase.
Right.
Chapter 17 therefore begins with Babylon the Great mounting the beast, his first phase, and ends on the other side of the millennium.
So
the
the
beast's
Babylon the
second
Great, which is the
phase.
image of the beast, or the church-state solution, union of the church and state, is called the image of the beast. That one is called Babylon the Great, and that's where we begin Revelation 17. So it begins with that, Babylon the Great, mounting the beast, his first phase, and ends on the other side of the millennium. When it comes back from millennium and is resurrected, that scarlet-colored beast is resurrected after millennium and becomes the eighth. Right? Let's hear.
As a result of the purification of the church, the sealing of the 144,000, the servants of God, the earth is lightened with the glory of the angel, with the everlasting gospel. God's people are then called out of Babylon, Babylon's domain, that they be not partakers of her sins. Then are they brought into a place where there are no sins, where the remnant keep the commandments of God, and where there is no fear of the plagues ever falling.
Now, so chapter 18, when the church is being sealed, and those who have refused and rejected the seal automatically become Babylon, and there is a call to take them out. Also, when the gospel goes to the Gentiles, and those who have accepted 666 also become Babylon, and the people of God are being called to join the saints in the kingdom. They are also being called out to join the saints in the kingdom. It becomes also this. So you can see there's a repetition of the sealing period, which starts with the church. It's repeated with the second fruits. Repetition of the call of Babylon in the church, and then also a repetition of that same Babylon to those who have received 666 in the Gentile world. There is a slaughter in the church, a punishment of those who rejected the seal in the church, and also a punishment of those who rejected the seal of God in the Gentile world, who are punished by the 7 last plagues. We understand that the 7 last plagues are coming, but we don't understand that Ezekiel 9 is coming. They are both coming for those who have rejected God's seal. Now, let's hear more where you left.
And so chapter 18 begins after the sealing of the servants of God and ends with the destruction of the woman, Babylon the Great.
Right.
This takes place after the saints have been called out and taken home.
That's why it's so clear that chapter 18 begins with the judgment of the living, or the sealing program. So that's why we should understand all these terminologies. Those who refuse when judgment begins first in the house of God are called Babylon. And those who reject in the time when the seal goes to the Gentiles are called Babylon. So it begins in the judgment of the living in the church first of all. Now let's hear.
And so chapter 18 begins after the sealing of the servants of God and ends with the destruction of the woman, Babylon the Great. This takes place after the saints have been called out of and taken home. The 19th chapter reveals the dissolution of the beast and of the false prophet.
Now, we see there's a false prophet in Revelation chapter 13 who was making miracles in front of the beast, the two-horned beast. But now that person is destroyed in chapter 19. It begins with the destruction of the false prophet. Now, that's where we are saying chapter 19, repeat it.
The 19th chapter reveals the dissolution of the beast and of the false prophet, also of the remnant, of those who are left in Babylon and the rest of the world. Thus, the millennium, brought to view in the 20th chapter, commences after the beasts and the false prophet, also the rest of the unrepentant world perish. And the only inhabitants that are left on the earth at the commencement of the millennium are the first and second fruits, the saints, of earth's great harvest field, and the blessed and holy, who come up in the first resurrection. Thus it is that Satan cannot deceive the nations during the millennium, and thus it is that the millennium is a time of peace. But from the day the nations are resurrected at the end of the millennium to their second death, the great rebel of the ages will again deceive them. The dead then, who came not out of their graves in the first resurrection, live not again until the 1,000 years are finished. From these we see that where chapter 19 leaves off, chapter 20 begins. The 21st chapter pictures the earth made new and the new Jerusalem.
21st chapter, we're seeing the earth made new and the new Jerusalem coming. You understand? Now let's go to the 22nd.
The 22nd chapter describes the throne of God and the river of life, and closes with the warnings against those who in their private interpretation add and subtract in order to construct their theories. The restriction against adding and subtracting shows that the revelation is complete as it is, that it needs not man's wisdom nor his help. If they violate this command, God shall take away their part out of the book of life. To graphically and chronologically illustrate what I have tried to present you, I shall let you now study it at the leisure through the aid of the chart.
This goes the summary of the whole chapters from chapter 6 up to chapter 22. That's what the judiciary on the judgment scene in 1844 were reviewing. And they're still reviewing until those incidents, events which are future to us, they're still waiting for them. And if you have more questions through this study, you visit our inbox on BSM TV to understand more fully. You should be able to talk about Revelation as a story so that you know in Revelation 13 what is there, Revelation 11 what is there, in Revelation 10 what is there, in Revelation 9, 8, 6, 7. This should be there so that you are completely sealed with the seal of the living God. May God bless you as you ponder to understand these events chapter by chapter. Those who want to know more about these prophecies, there are so many videos in BSM TV which have analyzed chapter to chapter. You can go through them. Google BSM TV on the app. Go and take and feast on the word so that when God comes, finds people who are intelligent, people who are not only, listening to those who are adding and subtracting from the book of Revelation, because it's got lots of blessing for you to hear, for you to understand, for you to be saved. May God bless you.